Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second lecture of this semester's Kent Seminar Speaker series. Our speaker today is Ms. Kelsey Owens, who is an Environmental Protection Specialist for the U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of the Transportation Secretary, Office of Policy. She specializes in transportation, electrification, and environmental justice. She's the holder of 2 master's degrees, a Master of Public Affairs and a Master of Science in Environmental Science. She also holds a Bachelor of Art, all from Indiana University. Let's all please welcome our speaker to the seminar.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to join you. As she mentioned, I am from Indiana, and I went to Indiana University, so we were just over the border. I also wanted to note really quickly that the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation's Chief Technology Officer sends his regards. He also went to U of I and was in the engineering school as well. Can I just confirm that you all can hear me and see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so today I will be covering how to build a future where everyone can drive and ride electric. I'm actually just going to be covering the DOT portion of this effort, but very excited to share with you what we've been up to and what we're looking forward to coming up. So I'll be covering the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation that we share with the Department of Energy, giving an overview of its basic activities and its role. I'll be talking about some DOT electric vehicle funding programs and our regulation. And then we'll discuss infrastructure deployment successes and challenges. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So just very quickly, I'll go over the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, the overview and priorities, because it really sets the stage for what we've been doing and how we've been collaborating with DOE, Department of Energy. So the Joint Office was established by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that was signed in 2021. It's a brand new office that is shared 50-50 by the Department of Transportation and Department of Energy to address 9 areas of joint interest between DOE and DOT, including technical assistance for EV charging, data sharing, performance of an EV charging network, training and certification, renewable energy promotion, electric infrastructure, reducing transportation-related emissions, and mitigating the effects of climate change, utility accommodations, and then any other issues that the Secretary of Transportation and the Secretary of Energy identify as issues of joint interest. DOT was given $300 million for the office, and then DOE handles the administration of the office. So we make sure that we really do have a joint interest. Ultimately, the Deputy Secretary of Energy and the Deputy Secretary of Transportation have oversight over this office. We meet with them on a monthly basis, if not more, and collaborate very closely with the White House on all things electrification. So the mission of the office is to accelerate an electrified transportation system that is affordable, convenient, equitable, reliable, and safe. And our vision is a future where everyone can ride and drive electric. The drive gets a lot of attention, but we're also giving equal measure to riding electric, looking at public transit and school buses. The Joint Office supports several programs that were established by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, including the Federal Highway Administration, we call it FHWA, their National EV Infrastructure Program, that's also known as NEVI. It's a formula program, so we give money directly to the state DOTs based on specific formulas, which determines which state gets how much money. It provides $5 billion in funding to strategically deploy EV charging infrastructure and to establish an interconnected network to facilitate data collection, access, and reliability. It also supports the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, which provides $2.5 billion in funding for 2 sub-programs. So there's a $1.25 billion community charging-based program and a $1.25 billion corridor-based charging program. And I should note that this program can also cover hydrogen, natural gas, and propane fueling infrastructure. We're really only seeing hydrogen, but technically we can do natural gas and propane as well. On the transit side, the Joint Office also supports the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA's, low and no emission grant program for transit providers that gives $5.6 billion in the support of low and no emission transit bus deployments. And then finally, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA's Clean School Bus Program, which distributes $5 billion in support of electric school bus deployments, also gets technical assistance from the Joint Office. Here you can see the sharing of roles between the Joint Office and DOT's Federal Highway Administration. Generally, the Joint Office handles all the technical infrastructure deployment and utility questions, and then Federal Highway Administration handles the federal program-specific topics like contracting, regulatory requirements, the National Environmental Policy Act, that kind of thing. I'll talk more in depth about DOT's programs in just a moment, but wanted to touch on school buses before we leave this section. So the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL, DOE and the Joint Office are also partnering with EPA to offer school bus technical assistance to districts. The goal here is to provide school districts with the knowledge, tools like the Joint Office website, driveelectric.gov's electric bus route analysis tool, and information needed to successfully plan for and deploy clean school buses. Additionally, the Clean Bus Planning Award program that's funded by the Joint Office and run through NREL reduces barriers to zero-emission bus deployment by providing schools and transit bus fleets with free technical assistance to develop comprehensive and customized fleet electrification transition plans. So now getting into the DOT funding programs, we have transportation electrification programs across most of our operating administrations, which is what we call the kind of segments within DOT. So Federal Highways is an operating administration. We also have FAA, Federal Transit, Federal Railroad, Maritime Administration, and a boatload of others. But because we have limited time today, I'll touch on the three main programs that reside within Federal Highways and Federal Transit. So first, I wanted to talk about the minimum standards and requirements regulation that we issued. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law required DOT to establish a minimum standards and requirements regulation for the construction of publicly accessible EV chargers under certain of our statutory authorities. These do include NEVI, CFI, and any EV charging infrastructure project funded with federal funds that is on a federal aid highway. But the majority of what we're talking about is NEVI and CFI. These standards and requirements apply to the installation, operation, or maintenance of EV charging infrastructure, the interoperability of EV charging infrastructure, traffic control devices, like stoplights and that kind of thing, or on-premises signage, data, network connectivity, and information on publicly available EV charging infrastructure locations, pricing, real-time availability, and accessibility through mapping applications. It's a regulation that would be good to read if you're trying to fall asleep, but it does have a lot of really good information that has set the stage that we're hearing a lot of the private industry and non-federal programs are following, because as it says in the title, it's a minimum standard, and then we know that it's only going to go up from here, and that states and private companies are seeking to improve upon the standards that are the minimum standards that we've set. So that's really exciting, and we're seeing the needle move. So turning to NEVI, so this is the formula program, and some general requirements that we have for NEVI chargers. So NEVI chargers must be placed along designated alternative fuel corridors, and these are corridors established by the Federal Highway Administration based on nominations that come in from the state DOTs. that an alternative fuel infrastructure will be developed along. So for example, the Illinois Department of Transportation would have sent nominations to the Federal Highway Administration saying, we would like to establish an alternative fuel corridor along I-70, for example. The Federal Highways would then look at that, and most likely agree to that, and then we would work towards building out a corridor that can support that kind of charging or fueling infrastructure along its entirety. So NEVI chargers have to be placed along those designated corridors every 50 miles within 1 mile of the highway exit. We require at least 4 CCS, that's the connector, ports capable of simultaneously providing at least 150 kilowatts to every vehicle. Now that the standard for J3400, another connector, has been established, and by J3400 I mean the Tesla charger, aka the North American Charging Standard, but now that it's a public standard, it's called J3400. Now that that's a standard, we do specify that it may be used for additional ports once the requirement for the 4 CCS connectors has already been met. Applicants can also use a CHAdeMO connector, but those are pretty much phased out entirely from any new vehicle, and really it's just kind of the hanging on Nissan Leafs that are still using CHAdeMO. So for the NEVI program, $2.4 billion has been announced to date, $1.5 billion in the first round, which covered fiscal year 22 and 23, and then an additional $885 million for fiscal year 24. We have now awarded funding for 2,916 ports. We currently have 69 ports open across 17 stations in 8 states. 40 states in total have released at minimum their first round of solicitations for proposals to build the stations. And then within those, 29 stations have issued conditional awards or put agreements in place for over 700 locations. And then speaking back to the alternative fuel corridors that I discussed on the last slide, we now have 81,000 miles of EV fuel corridors that have been designated, with more being added each year. The state EV infrastructure deployment plans for all 50 states were, these were plans that were required. They were submitted by state DOTs, and their plans basically lay out how the state intends to use their allotment of funding to deploy EV chargers. So the first round was approved in September of 2022. Annual updates to those plans are now required, and we are currently reviewing the plans for fiscal year 25. Then on the charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grant program side, so this program has $2.5 million in funding over 5 years for EV charging, hydrogen, propane, and natural gas. Again, it's divided into 2 distinct programs. The corridor grant program, again, is located along the alternative fuel corridors, and this is an interesting piece of information, that they must contract with a private entity. This is a way that we are really pushing the collaboration between governments and public entities to support a maintained EV charging network. If the government does it ourselves, we know we're going to run out of money. We can get them up and running, we can support operation for a short while, but it really has to be the private entities that support them in perpetuity. We kind of considered NEVI and CFI to be kind of seed money in a way, and to kind of fill the gaps in what the private sector has not yet done, and to really be a catalyst for growth. But then the private sector really needs to take over from there. For the community grant programs, these are chargers that can be located along any public road or in a publicly accessible location. It says, the regulations say that they may contract with a private entity, but it isn't necessarily required. We know that these are, some of the community locations are not going to be as enticing for the private sector. So we don't want to require that in case a government can't find a private partner. So awards for the first round of CFI were announced in January and included $623 million in grants to 47 applicants across 22 states and Puerto Rico and 2 tribes. Last week, we announced the awardees for the second half of the first round. I'll explain more in a second, which provides a total of $521 million to 51 applicants in 29 states and the District of Columbia, and this included 8 tribes. Applications for the second round close next week, and we're gearing up to review those. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law also requires that 10% of each year's NEVI formula funding be set aside to fund grants for states and localities that require additional assistance to strategically deploy EV charging stations. The first round of that was used for the EV Charger Reliability and Accessibility Accelerator, which we call EV-RA. The government loves acronyms, to repair or replace broken or non-operational EV charging ports to improve reliability of existing charging infrastructure. We heard very clearly from the public that they were frustrated by pulling up to an EV charger and it not working. The chargers were staying consistently broken, and that's just not acceptable. We need everyone to be very, very comfortable that they can pull up and charge successfully the first time. So this funding was aimed at addressing that problem. We identified all of the broken public chargers that had been reported to us, and were able to provide 24 awards in 20 states that will repair approximately 4,500 chargers. And these chargers are beginning to come online, so we're very excited about that. The second round of the 10% set aside funded what I just discussed on the last slide. That was this round 1B of CFI. So we used that funding to award grants to very excellent applications that we didn't have enough money to fund in the first round of CFI. So we are still evaluating what the third round of funding will go to, but we're excited to continue to use that funding to fill in any gaps or issues that we see. FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, also has a low or no emission vehicle program that will provide funding to states and local governments to purchase or lease zero emission and low emission transit buses. It can also fund the acquisition, construction, or leasing of required supporting facility. It can fund bus stations. It's a really excellent program. Since the start of the administration, and FTA has more than doubled the number of electric buses on the road. NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation partner with FTA to provide a transit vehicle technical assistance concierge program. I had to make sure to read that one. That provides technical assistance to agencies that are currently receiving LONO, that's what we call the program, LONO funds, or are planning to apply or use other FTA program funds to receive technical assistance. Last, on the money side, I just want to briefly touch on the joint office's funding opportunity announcements. So within the joint office's $300 million, they can set aside a bit of that money to fund targeted funding opportunities that further the goal of ensuring that everyone can ride and drive electric. Their first FOA was the Ride and Drive Electric funding opportunity announcement that sought to address discrete challenges to a convenient, affordable, reliable, and equitable EV charging network by enhancing institutional capacity, encouraging holistic charging model approaches, fostering inclusive and equitable outcomes, and ensuring a top-notch customer experience. So it asked for community-driven models for EV charging deployment, ideas for workforce development, ideas for increasing commercial capacity for testing and certification of high-power EV chargers, and then ideas on ensuring performance and reliability for high-power EV chargers. Their second FOA, which we are currently evaluating, sought to address electric mobility issues in communities without access to home charging infrastructure. So a lot of curbside charging and multifamily housing charging, and then sought solutions for managed charging to optimize grid efficiency and integrate renewable energy. So to discuss our infrastructure deployment successes and challenges. First, on the successes, we have now more than doubled the number of EV chargers that are available since President Biden took office. And we're adding approximately 1,000 chargers per week. President Biden set a goal of having 500,000 public chargers by 2030, and we're on track to get there early. How early changes depending on the EV charging market, but we know we're going to get there early. DOE maintains an alternative fuel data center. It's an online platform that tracks all available stations for propane, natural gas, hydrogen, and electric vehicles. We also have smattering of data on Canada, but really the US information is very strong. You can look at how many chargers and how many charging ports are available by state, by type of fueling. You can look at level 2 versus DC fast charger. You can see how many are temporarily unavailable, how many are. We're getting more and more data on how many are planned, but it's updated very consistently and has some really, really interesting data. Through that fuel center, you can also look at historical trends. It's just an exceptional product. We also successfully stood up an EV working group. So this was required under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And so this is a federal advisory committee, which has very strict rules and is governed by the Federal Advisory Committee Act. And this EV advisory committee consists of representatives from 6 federal agencies and 19 stakeholder groups, including utility companies, automakers, auto rental companies, equity groups, tribes. It's an absolutely exceptional group. You can go onto the Joint Office website and look at the full membership. This group meets regularly to discuss recommended barriers and solutions to EV adoption. And then the group will be preparing a report to Congress and the White House on recommendations. The full group meetings are public. You're welcome to watch recordings of previous meetings as well as meetings in the future. We've also developed an incredible amount of resources for stakeholders aimed at accelerating deployment of EV charging infrastructure. In addition to the resources I've already mentioned, other examples include the Joint Office, DOE, and EPA's. They collaborated on a guide for the deployment of zero-emission, medium, and heavy-duty vehicle charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure from 2024 to, I think, 2040. It sets out a plan by which hubs can be established for medium and heavy duty charging, and then those hubs can be connected, and then ultimately we will have hopefully a nationwide network, and I'll talk more about the challenges of that in a moment. We also have white papers, which are research papers on helping states address EV charger income and deploying charging at multifamily housing properties and curbside charging, which have their own individual challenges. We have a public EV infrastructure playbook that has 8 modules with in-depth information on a variety of topics. We have a rural and an urban EV charging guide that each guide is supposed to be a one-stop shop for a community that's interested in deploying chargers. We really have completely revolutionized the coordination between federal governments with the Joint Office. There has never been an office that is fully shared by 2 departments. Usually we will speak, once a week or whatever with collaborators at other federal agencies, but to have this group of experts brought in from across DOT, across DOE, including their national labs, is exceptional. And to have them working on the same goals all day, every day together has dramatically enhanced the efficiency and the speed with which information flows and solutions are developed. We've also dramatically improved our coordination with EPA, Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, the General Service Administration, which handles all of the federal fleet cars. I don't know how many federal cars we have in the government, but it's tens, if not hundreds of thousands at this point. And the GSA has set goals for electrification. We also work with the U.S. Postal Service and then other federal agencies. We've we've contributed very, very greatly to providing technical solutions to public charging challenges. To provide just a couple of examples, and I'll again guide you to driveelectric.gov, the Joint Office's website. There are an incredible amount of resources that are available, and things I've spoken about already, but also other information, other opportunities for technical assistance. So for another example of a technical solution, the Joint Office has a partnership with the Linux Foundation to build an open source software tool to support communications between EV chargers and other systems. This is a project called Everest, capital EV, Everest. We think we're clever. And they've also funded a team from 3 of the national labs to lead what's called the National Charging Experience Consortium, or ChargeX. So this has membership from Argonne National Laboratory, the Idaho National Laboratory, and the National Renewable Energy Lab to collaborate with various organizations and EV charging companies to address challenges related to payment processing and user interface, vehicle charger communication, diagnostic data sharing. And now ChargeX has released a report on best practices for payment systems. This came out a couple months ago. It examines different EV charging payment methods and proposes solutions for several well-known payment issues. So then on the challenges side, the first 4 of these are really related to technical issues. Reliability, as I mentioned before, the public was really hampered by a sense of a lack of reliability. When you can't, the frustration when you pull up to a gas station and the pump is out of order. Usually you can just pull to another pump, but that isn't always necessarily the case for EV chargers. Sometimes the whole station is down. So we needed to dramatically increase the reliability. And that's what we tried to are doing with EV Raw, and also through the various technological solutions that we're working on with the Joint Office, DOE, and DOT. We also are very aware of a risk of cybersecurity issues because of the usually wireless flow of information. And anytime you're capturing payment or location data, that data has to be supremely secure. There's also interoperability issues that occur between various types of vehicles with different chargers, and all of that has to be highly tested to ensure that if you get a let's see, a Mach-E, for example, that you can charge at a charge point station, you can charge at an EV Go station with no issues. Data sharing is another issue that we are working to overcome. When we first put out the minimum standards and requirements regulation, which said to charging companies, you have to send us this data on a monthly or annual basis, we got a lot of pushback. Companies are very, very, very possessive of their information, and understandably so. So we had to kind of break down those walls, so to speak, and coordinate data sharing. We now have our EV chart system, which is the mechanism by which we pull in data from the EV charging companies to ensure that they're meeting our minimum standards on uptime and or uptime, the percentage of time that the chargers are operational, and other data. We also know that we have immense equity issues in this area. Once you have a ubiquitous public charging network, that's one thing, but especially when you're starting from the beginning and when you're working with a foundation of a network that was built by private entities that were looking for maximum profit, we need to make sure that now we're coming in and saying, okay, where and how do we build to make this network equitable, not just in the future, but from now on. So that's part of the target for our funding, is to make sure that urban communities, rural communities, low-income communities are all seeing the same EV charging opportunities. We also are ensuring that our chargers are accessible for the disability community. We know that a lot of chargers that were built previously are not accessible. We're now working with the Access Board, the U.S. Access Board, which is an independent agency, to establish standards for EV chargers that can be used by the disability community. So that's a really exciting opportunity. President Biden established what's called the Justice 40 initiative that sets a goal that at least 40% of the benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. The NEVI and the CFI programs fall under that requirement. So we are ensuring that at the very minimum, 40% of the benefits for our chargers flow to disadvantaged communities. Again, this also speaks to the challenges with curbside charging, which is a problem because you can't stretch a charger across a sidewalk. There are issues with people running into chargers. There are issues with theft. And then for multifamily housing, where not everyone clearly has their own garage, how do you manage that? How do you get the electricity where it needs to go, especially when a facility has already been built? How do you manage ensuring that spaces are freed up when appropriate? Because you can't build, at this point, you can't build chargers for all of the residents. So it's a staging, hopefully very temporary process. And then how can we encourage that multifamily housing complexes include planning for EV chargers moving forward? The next problem we're dealing with is utility coordination. And this is just making sure that and assisting any entity that is looking to deploy EV charging, assisting their communication with whatever their electric utility is, making sure that development of improvements to a system are coordinated so that if a utility is planning to build additional capacity in a certain area or is doing any other improvements, that it's being done with EV charging in mind. Working on improving the response time between the two entities, working on supply chain issues. We know there are some shortages in transformers that a lot of entities are dealing with. Making sure that there are available electricians. This effort requires an enormous amount of electricians. So we're working with with a number of entities in the Department of Labor to enhance training and certification opportunities for the electrician workforce. And we are seeing a swift uptake, but there's still a need for more. Another issue that I didn't put on this slide is related to deployment, and it's related to state contracting delays. So each of the state DOTs has to go out with a request for proposals. They then receive the proposals, they have to be evaluated, and then there's a number of other steps that have to happen before shovels actually hit the dirt. A lot of that is outside of federal government control, and a lot of it is outside of state DOT control. Some processes have to be approved by their state legislatures, for example, that only meet so often. So that can cause kind of rippling delays in deployment. Permitting is also an issue. A lot lot of state and local governments don't necessarily have experience with permitting, like electrical permitting or other permits for EV chargers. So we need to continue to expand the public knowledge and training opportunities for permitting staff at state and local agencies. But that is rapidly improving. And then what I mentioned a couple slides ago was the medium and heavy duty infrastructure side. The necessity for staged deployment is another challenge. With the strategy now in place, we I think have set a good foundation, but because of the distance that a lot of medium and heavy duty vehicles need to travel to transport goods across the country, we had to take a very strategic approach to allow that to happen. So starting with more local and regional travel, and then eventually getting those hubs connected to each other, and then expanding to a nationwide network has to be so carefully done so that we don't interrupt the supply chain, increase delivery times, decrease customer satisfaction and reliability. So that's just kind of another thing that we have to work through. But luckily, we have a lot of coordination between DOT and DOE and with the states that we're able to communicate very closely. So with all of that, and I know I just threw so much information at you, I'd be happy to take whatever questions you have. I've also provided my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have questions on transportation electrification. I also have plenty of information I can provide on decarbonization of the aviation industry and of ports. And I'm also happy to provide any information I can on working for the federal government, getting a job with the federal government. And then lastly, I've also included the Joint Office's website at driveelectric.gov. But happy to take any questions that you have.
Can you hear me? This is Doug. Yeah. You have the world map behind you. And that said, are there other countries that are doing this better than us or worse than us in the U.S.? And are we, is the U.S. looking at those countries to learn from them or collaborate with them in any way? Would you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of had a smile on my face since we literally just met with Mexico 2 hours ago. We are, well, first of all, we're coordinating very, very, very closely. We've been coordinating for the last couple of years extensively with Canada. And we're also coordinating with Mexico. We have presented to and met with the United Nations and various other global organizations that are aimed at kind of a global coordination on this effort and sharing best practices, and those nations that are ahead can share with those that are coming up behind. To answer your question on who's doing it better, we have some countries that got out in front of us that we're able to learn from. Norway is a really prime example. They have an exceptional EV adoption rate. We also have, and the Joint Office actually took a trip a few months ago to a number of European countries that have developed solutions for some of the electrification, some of the charging questions that we've had. Amsterdam, for example, has some exceptional models on electric bike infrastructure. So we're able to collaborate really closely with them on how did you manage the funding, how did you manage the electrification, how did you manage the other deployment questions, and then we also meet with countries that are not quite as far along as we are to ensure that we're sharing the knowledge and the resources that we've gained. But it's really been an exceptionally exciting effort. In the last few months or the last year, I'd say we presented at the UN Transportation Committee, which was extremely exciting. We've talked to Japan, South Korea, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, and then the trip to Europe that involved England and France and Germany and the Netherlands. So it is truly a global experience.
Thank you, Ms. Owens, for the nice presentation. We'll see if we have any questions in the room. Professor? Yes.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful presentation. So more of a policy question. Why should federal government do this at all? Why shouldn't be on the shoulder of the private industry? Like, I mean, there's no secret that this administration does not like Tesla, but they've done a fantastic job in creating a network of charging stations, which gives them the advantage. So by funding all these, which is very nice for consumers like me, but by funding these you're creating a sort of an advantage for other companies. So I'm wondering, why should federal government fund this at all?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. The primary reason is that private companies will only go to the locations that have an established population of EV owners because they know that's where the money is. But the catch-22 of that is people aren't going to adopt EV chargers unless the EV charging network is there and they feel comfortable that they can charge. And it's not just at home, but people really don't want to adopt unless they know they can charge while they're on the road as well. So in order to get the second kind of wave of EV adopters to adopt, we need to kind of plant the seeds of the infrastructure, and the ricocheting effect then will be that once we get the infrastructure started in a new place, then people will feel comfortable adopting EV chargers. Then those chargers, adopting EVs, then those chargers will start to make more and more money. And at that point, because we're partnering so closely with a private entity, we can then step out, the private companies step in, and they get to make their money. This also makes sure that the infrastructure is equitable, so we can make sure that we're saying, okay, it looks like this low-income neighborhood is not getting any chargers. We know that we can come in with our money and, like I just said, kind of be the trigger for allowing EV adoption in that area. We also, the other big thing is that by setting minimum standards and requirements, we are forcing a level of performance of our chargers. And then it looks real bad on the private industry if they're not performing to those standards, even if we didn't fund those chargers. But we're saying these chargers have to be operational 97% of the time. That's a very minimum. So we just kind of set the bar of that. But because we, the federal government, are the only ones that can do that nationwide, it has to be us doing that.
Can I ask one very quick thing? So thank you. I appreciate the comment. So just one quick thing to add. I drive an electric car. I've been driving an electric car for like 5 years now. The biggest issue of adopting it, like in Champaign, is not existing of charging station. There are not many cars, like there are only 4 fast charging stations in town, 3 Teslas and 1 regular EV Go or something. So, but there's not many electric cars, they're always empty. But the issue is from the manufacturer side. My car has been in shop more than I've been able to use it, mainly because they cannot fix it here. The mechanics in these small towns do not know how to deal with these things. So it's more of a manufacturing issue for adopting it than lack of the infrastructure for charging. Just wondering if anything like that would fall within your focus, or that is left out completely for the manufacturers to deal with.
Yeah, so it doesn't directly fall within our purview necessarily. However, it does fall within the purview of the EV working group that's looking at barriers to adoption, and we definitely definitely recognize that there is a lack of training for mechanics on how to work with EVs, and that there are a lot of safety, kind of additional safety considerations for working on an EV with the battery. So we have been in communication with Department of Labor, and they are also working to support the kind of spread of knowledge. Yeah, but automakers absolutely have to be involved, and that is something that I think will be improving here very quickly.
Thank you.
We'll take one more question.
I was just wondering, what about the police cars? Like, I've never seen an electric police car. What is the attitude of police stations about electric cars? Like, have you been in contact with them about this, or like, what do they think?
They're coming.
They are.
They're coming. I don't think I can say anything else, but they're coming. Yeah, and it is something that they're looking for, because they also have to build the infrastructure for financial purposes also. It's part of the issue with medium and heavy duty as well, because the vehicles are so expensive. That type of car is generally going to, the gasoline version is going to need to have its full gasoline life before they switch over to an EV. So those adoptions will most certainly come, and the automakers are, to my knowledge, continuing to work with departments to develop good options. But that adoption will be, I think, a little bit slower, just because of the rate of turnover for that type of very specialized vehicle.
It's a really small question. You said you're planting the seed for like future adoption, right? But someone has to keep watering that plant at some point, right? Because the money for the infrastructure bill is going to dry up eventually. So who is that going to be passed for, and do they have the capability to make this sustainable? Because these stations get paid, right?
Yeah, so the hope is that because of the rate of adoption that we're seeing, that it's pretty consistent and it's steadily increasing, that the rate of deployment and the amount of funding provided for operation and maintenance will overlap with the adoption to produce a sustainable model. Each of the applications that we review for the charging and fueling infrastructure side, for example, needs to discuss sustainability to ensure that we don't end up with a bunch of stranded assets or defunct stations. And that's why we work so closely with our grantees to make sure that the locations that they're choosing and their business models, for example, are sustainable past 5 years, for example.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that's very top of mind for us. So we work really closely with the EV charging companies, with the automakers, to make sure that everyone's in lockstep, because we know with that chicken and egg problem that everything has to move together concurrently with the same understandings.
We have time for one more question. Professor Fontu, you may unmute and ask your question.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kelsey, for the really useful information that you shared with us. I have two questions, one tied to reliability issues and one tied to resilience. I think you touched upon the reliability and making sure that the infrastructure funded through NEVI is operational 97% of the time. But I wonder, do network providers have structured standards for the reliability assessment? Because my understanding is that there might not be just operational issues, but also accessibility issues or information provision issues, transparency issues. And the second question related to resilience is how about planning for hazardous events that would inadvertently affect charging infrastructure like they affect gasoline station infrastructure? How do we plan for these things? And are there any strategies or any approaches for making sure that the charging infrastructure is resilient to these events that are happening more and more frequently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Those are fantastic questions. On the first question, a couple things. So the private EV charging network does not have standards. Yeah, does not have standards like we do, but like I said, we are setting the bar by gathering data from the stations that we charge through our EV chart system. We are able to monitor compliance with our regulations and standards, recognizing that there are some things that we did not establish regulations around, some of the physical accessibility requirements. And in those cases, we are relying on and need to continue to have communication with our stakeholders, including public users. We keep our eye on some of the apps that have a review function to see, okay, this looks like this company, this specific charger is not meeting requirements. And so we see what voluntary mechanisms we have to help support that and help support improvement. Yeah, but I think, like I said, our minimum standards and requirements are really helping. And we're hoping that will continue to spread. And like I said, that it's just the minimum and we continue to grow from there. On your second question, we have evaluated all of our CFI applications and are considering climate change and extreme weather events in all of the applications that we fund. We look at, and applications are required to, I believe it's required, but they have been providing information on floodplain location. And we consider technology that will protect the charger should a location have an extreme flooding event and unexpectedly flood, to keep users safe and avoid electricity getting into any standing water. We are certainly through the entirety of DOT considering resilience against sea level rise and extreme heat. Sorry, I'm running through the other disasters that we consider, but not necessarily don't necessarily affect EV charging. But flooding is the main one that we are really making sure that these chargers are safe and able to be used in hurricanes and floods and things that are just continuing to get worse.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We can all thank Ms. Owens now for their time.
Thank you all so much for having me.